Good morning. It's another gloomy, rainy Thursday morning, and I'm here again, as threatened, with another story about a woman from the Old Testament. In 1938, there was a movie that came out with Bette Davis and Henry Fonda. The name of that movie was Jezebel. It was about a Southern belle who was really self-assured. She was somewhat arrogant, somewhat shameless in her behavior. And she was supposed to have been patterned, I guess, after Jezebel in the Bible. However, at the end of the movie, as I remember, Bette Davis does take care of a lot of folks who have yellow fever in New Orleans and sort of redeems her life and herself in the eyes of most people. The Jezebel in the Bible, however, does not have any redeeming qualities that I can ascertain. Now, the story of Jezebel is found in a number of different places in 1st and 2nd Kings. And we'll talk about those places as we go through this story today so that you can go back and read all of the nasty things that she did. Now, what we know about Jezebel from the Bible is that she was the wife of King Ahab. Ahab was the king of the northern kingdom, which was called Israel. If you remember, after the death of Solomon, the kingdom was divided into the northern and the southern parts, with the southern part being called Judah and the northern part being called Israel. Another thing that happened at the time of Solomon is that he began to marry into foreign families. He would marry foreign princesses to forge alliances that would further his goals. And this is a pattern that we continue to see throughout the books of Kings and Chronicles, that the kings of Israel in particular would marry foreign princesses who followed after foreign gods. That was a bad thing in Israel because it enticed the king to follow these foreign gods just as their wives did. This is the pattern with Ahab, because his wife Jezebel was a princess of Tyre. Her daddy was the king of Tyre. She was a Phoenician. They lived along the coast, the Mediterranean coast there of Israel. And she had grown up worshiping the Phoenician fertility gods. There were two of them. There was Baal, and I know you've heard about Baal, and then there was Asherah. So Baal was the male and Asherah was the female. And this god and goddess were in charge of, if you will, fertility. They made sure that wives and livestock were able to breed. Baal in particular was responsible for the rains. It was very, very important to the people in the Middle East that you pay honor to Baal and Asherah so that the rains would come when they were supposed to come and you wouldn't starve to death. We find a lot of times in the Old Testament that there is a syncretism, that people absolutely do worship Yahweh, the God of Israel, but they will also worship these fertility gods in order to make sure that all their bases are covered, if you will. All right, so Jezebel follows after foreign gods, and she is not a nice girl. She had a lot of power. The Bible never calls her the Queen of Israel, but actually she operates in that vein. We first see her in 1 Kings 16. It doesn't say a lot about her there, but we have a story in 1 Kings 18 that's a great little story. It's a story about Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Now, Jezebel, in her household, she kept up about 900 prophets of Baal and Asherah. Elijah challenged them to make it rain, and they didn't make it rain. He won the challenge, and after he won the challenge, Elijah killed all of those false prophets, the prophets of the false gods. And Jezebel was just a little bit upset about that. I guess you can imagine that if somebody came and killed the people who told you what you wanted to hear, then maybe you wouldn't be happy about that. And she threatened Elijah's life. She had enough power that in threatening Elijah's life, he believed her and he ran away. It's a great story. You need to read it. Again, that was in 1 Kings 18. So the next thing that we see about Jezebel is actually in 1 Kings chapter 21. And there's this little story about a man whose name was Naboth. Now, Ahab and Jezebel lived in the Jezreel Valley. If you go to Mount Carmel in Israel today, you can look out over the whole Jezreel Valley. It is beautiful. It is fertile. It's a great place. Well, they lived here in the Jezreel Valley, and the thing is that they had a neighbor whose name was Naboth who had a vineyard, and this vineyard was right next door to where they lived. And Ahab decided that he had to have that vineyard. He went to Naboth and he said, I want to buy your vineyard. And Naboth said, no, I don't think so. So he went back to Naboth and he said, well, what about if we trade and I give you a better vineyard for yours? And Naboth said, no, I really don't think so, because this land that is mine has been in my family for generations. The implication seems to be that that was part of the allotment that his family had gotten when Joshua came into Canaan, way back years and years ago. So he was very attached to this property and he felt like it belonged to him and his family, and he refused to give it to King Ahab. Well, Ahab was a little boy. He was a man, but he behaved like a little boy. The Bible says that he was so upset that he went to bed and he turned his face to the wall and he refused to eat. Pouted and just really kind of pitched a fit. So Jezebel comes in and says, what in the world's wrong? Why are you not eating? And Ahab tells her the story about the vineyard. Jezebel thinks of this really more as a challenge to the authority of the monarchy than just a little misunderstanding, just a little piece of property. She takes the king's seal. See, this is one of those things that makes us think that she was acting more as the queen than just as his wife. She took his seal and she sent some letters out to some of the supporters and said, I want you to have a special meal for Naboth. And while you're there, I also want you to accuse him of treason. And so they did that. They had this nice meal for Naboth. They had two of the conspirators who sat by him, and they accused Naboth of treason. He had said something against the king and against God, and they meant Yahweh in this case. So treason was a big deal. Treason is still a big deal. And they took Naboth out and they stoned him to death. Jezebel got word that Naboth was dead. Some of the folks that I was reading this week said that's interesting that she used the king's seal. She was working in the king's name, but she got the report instead of the king. Another demonstration of the power that Jezebel had. So Jezebel then goes to Ahab and says, okay, Naboth is dead, and since you are the king, his property reverts to you. Elijah hears about this, and he prophesies against Ahab and Jezebel. He says that Ahab and his family, his entire line, will die out, and that Jezebel will be eaten by dogs. He also says, very specifically, that Ahab is going to have his blood shed in the same place that Naboth did, and that the dogs will lick up his blood from the place where Naboth died. Gruesome stuff, I know, but that's what it says. The next king in line was Jehu, and when he came into power, and that is in 2 Kings chapter 9, it tells of Jehu killing Ahab, killing Ahab's sons, and at this point in time, Jezebel was still powerful enough that he killed her. Actually, he went to kill her, and people threw her out the window of the palace, and she fell to the ground where she died. And indeed, before they could get back to bury her body, the dogs had eaten her. Not an uplifting tale, not an encouraging tale of a woman in the Old Testament. Actually, it's more of a cautionary tale about how we should be careful in the way that we use our power and the way that we use our influence. So as you go through your weekend, remember the tale of Jezebel. Again, that was in 1 Kings 18, 1 Kings 21, and 2 Kings 9. I hope you have a great rainy day. I think that it's supposed to be sunny later on this afternoon. Let's all hope so. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you again next Thursday morning with another story about a woman from the Old Testament. Thank you, and have a great day.